The shooting range. In this episode, pages of history, John Hannah's incredible feat, tactics and strategy, SPAAGs in ground battles, and metal beasts, a futuristically armed aircraft. The English Electric Lightning aircraft has already been featured in our show. Back then, we called it a pure fighter plane after reviewing its armament. But War Thunder has recently introduced a new modification of the Lightning capable of carrying rockets and bombs. Why don't we see what it's worth? This aircraft is propelled by a twin turbojet engine with afterburners. Self-sealing fuel tanks are found in the wing consoles and in the lower part of the fuselage. The nose cone hides the radar system. Its fixed armament includes two 30mm autocannons with a total ammo pool of 240 rounds. The aircraft can also carry guided air-to-air missiles, conventional bombs, and rockets. Let's discuss air combat first. Much like the regular version, this new Lightning feels quite confident in a dogfight. Its powerful engines can accelerate the machine to more than 1,300 kilometers per hour near the ground, an exceptional result for its battle rating of 9.3. However, such a speed pushes the structural limits of the airframe's maximum load. If you don't reduce your throttle in time, you might lose a piece of your wing. As for maneuverability, don't expect any sharp turns from the Lightning. It can turn just well enough to attack your enemy, but that's about it. This British fighter's flight performance favors energy tactics, simple and efficient. Piercing through a bunch of enemies engaged in a dogfight, the Lightning can become an electric fly swatter that bumps your score up with each swing. Strange as it may seem, its main weapon is its autocannons. Their ballistics aren't as good as, say, the Vulcans, which becomes obvious at high speeds, but they're still good enough with some skill. Besides the shooters, the plane has a couple missiles. Why can't we say the missiles are the main armament? Well, first, there's too few of them. With only 2 available, you won't get many frags even if both of them score. And don't forget that attentive enemies can dodge missiles. So it makes sense to start an attack by launching the AAMs to scare the enemy a little, and then finish them off with the cannons. The Lightning's good in air combat, but the main new feature of this modification is its bombs and rockets. Did you feel surprised when you saw missile hardpoints above the Jaguar's wings? Here's a new treat for you: over-wing rocket hardpoints, 2 for each console. Combined with regular pylons, this design looks, well, pretty unusual. If you still feel unsurprised, the Lightning can also open its bomb bay and show you 48 more rockets there. Unfortunately, this futuristic loadout is more impressive than efficient. The plane has no ballistic computer, so accurate high-speed ground attacks can be a pretty hefty task. That's why we can recommend against taking the maximum load of rockets. Put some onto your overwing pylons and keep the underwing ones reserved for conventional bombs. And of course, remember about the air-to-air missiles. After all, this Lightning is still an excellent fighter, albeit not as pure. Fire. This word is alarming enough on the ground, but in the air, it induces panic and despair. And the better a person understands the true nature of a fire on board a plane, the harder it is for them to stay sharp in the decisive moment. And this is precisely what happened in the skies above Antwerp on September 15, 1940, when Handley Page Hampton, one of the 89th Squadron bombers, received a direct hit with an anti-aircraft round. The ignition happened in an instant and was followed by the worst scenario. Both of the half-empty central fuel tanks caught fire. The CO2 extinguishers did their job and prevented a fume explosion, but burning fuel was still leaking out of the penetrated tanks both outside and inside the fuselage. The fire was engulfing the plane up thick and fast. Commander Claire Connor assessed the situation, ordered the crew to abandon the aircraft, and shifted course towards the sea. He knew that a crash was inevitable and didn't want the 8-ton bomber to plunge into some residential area in the Belgian city below. The lower gunner and navigator didn't need much convincing and soon engaged their parachutes. That made 2 canopies. But where was the third one? As it turned out, the second radio gunner, Sergeant John Hanna, chose to ignore the order. He'd already used both extinguishers to stop the fire inside the fuselage, and now, knee-deep in the blazing flame, was stuffing the fuel tank holes with his parachute. Poisonous leaded petroleum was streaming down Hanna's hands. The fumes were filling up his lungs, but it wasn't enough to stop him. He wasn't some 18-year-old greenhorn, mad with fear, frantically trying to prevent something clearly inevitable. His actions were comprehensive and consistent. The sergeant first put down the fire where it could damage the actuator links to the ailerons, the elevators, and the rudder. He cut off the power and manually closed the fuel feed connecting the burning tanks to the engines. If only he could also stop the fire from getting to the oil tanks and filters. And he did. John Hanna stopped it. All of a sudden, Commander Connor realized there was no open fire anymore and the plane was under control despite spewing smoke from all its holes and burn-throughs. Moreover, thanks to Hanna's impossible, extreme bravery multiplied by his amazing decisions under inhuman circumstances, the fire never got to the oil tanks, the engines, or the external fuel tanks. They still had enough to go back home. And return home, Hampton did. More than that, it even had its chassis still intact to perform a regular landing. The fire never had a chance to eat up the hydraulics. The young sergeant's incredible bravery was awarded with the Victoria Cross, and King George VI presented it to him personally in Buckingham Palace. His Majesty also noted that John Hanna, now a flight sergeant, became the youngest person to receive the award in the Second World War. As soon as he recovered from his terrible burns, he got back into the action and continued to fight in the skies up until the end of December 1942, protecting his country in the worst days of the war. Unfortunately, his wounds, poisoning, and burns soon led to tuberculosis of the lungs, which had no cure back then. The brave Sergeant Hanna saw Victory Day and died on the 7th of June, 1947, at the young age of 25. He could have simply bailed out that day, and his life would have been completely different. But he didn't. He couldn't. A hero may never retreat when fate itself nudges them towards everlasting fame. Young Sergeant Hanna was consistent and logical, even in this. Self-propelled anti-aircraft guns are created to protect ground vehicles from air raids. They're pretty successful at completing this kind of task, but today we'd like to talk about a non-trivial use for anti-aircraft vehicles, meaning fighting enemy ground forces. As usual, we'll have three machines representing three generations of the class: the M13 MGMC, the AMX-13 DCA, and the ZSU-57-2. We'll start with the abandoned factory map. Early SPAAGs use wheeled and half-tracked chassis that are good on firm surfaces but on softer soils show lower cross-country performance and maneuverability compared to the full-tracked versions. Due to this caveat, you'd be better off sticking to roads. The low production rate is conducive to shelter seeking, while the cannons dictate the best tactic. Penetrating the front plates of most tanks isn't easy, but a volley to the side may be a quick way to knock out an enemy thanks to a high rate of fire. With all these pros and cons in mind, look for an area with some firm ground and a lot of buildings. For the abandoned factory map, the best place can be found around the central point that the M13 can reach among the first and poke some enemy sides full of holes. Medium-ranked SPAAGs usually have a tracked chassis, which opens some new directions for them. Thanks to its light tank base, the AMX will have no issues taking the hangars around Point A, while its compact size and good maneuverability will help it stay covert on the move. It has an increased caliber with a higher penetration rate, but the enemy tanks have better armor too, so try to flank the enemy every time that you can. You can use the third-person view to peek around the corner or the hangar wall and wait for the enemy to get distracted, lose attention, and become fully unprepared for a bold attack from your anti-aircraft gun. Top-ranked SPAAGs are mostly similar to their predecessors, but they have to face early MBTs, machines that aren't too thickly armored but usually pretty mobile. You can penetrate many of them from the front, but don't expect any mobility advantage, meaning you may not be able to take key positions first. SPAAGs can't boast survivability either, so try to avoid areas with a high risk of getting shot. The perfect zone here is between points B and C, where you can get discreetly to the enemy rear. Now, how about open maps? Let's take Kuban, for instance. The first issue early SPAAGs will encounter is an obvious lack of firm surfaces. You'll have to build your routes along the few local roads, avoiding open areas. For Kuban, the best option is point C. The rocks will hide you from long-range shots, there will be no exposing hills on your way here, and the road is pretty decent. You're unlikely to reach it first, but moving in the second line behind your allies is a good idea. Mid-ranked tracked SPAAGs don't have to limit their attacks to this direction. They also have the option to occupy a height in square C2. It gives you a good sightline at tanks around point A. Later SPAAGs may enjoy a route going through the depression between points B and C. Even a face-to-face meeting with the enemy won't be a huge issue since you'd be able to spot them early in this open place and get ready. Don't forget to clear the skies in the heat of your ground battles. After all, this is the main and a very important mission for any anti-aircraft gun. Still, sticking to the respawn point and looking into the enemy skies is far from the best idea. Many anti-aircraft guns can successfully fight enemy ground vehicles or at least help their allies with it, and you shouldn't ignore this in battle. And now it's time we answered some of the questions you asked us in the comments. The first question was sent by a player called Gusto. How do you change the color of the missile lock and the radar in air battles? Hi Gusto. The setting you're looking for is called Aircraft HUD Color, found in Options, Main Parameter, Air Battle Settings. Magnus Stoltenberg asks, why do some air-to-air missiles take like 20 seconds to lock on while other missiles take like 2? Hey Magnus. Technological progress introduced some major changes to missile standby to launch times. In the game, this time is originally a balancing feature meant to even out the performance of various types of ordnance. We've recently reviewed it, so now all aircraft missiles have a standby to launch time of 1 second and a lock-on time of 20 seconds. Another question comes from Ayako. It's an annoying move when an IS-2 just uses its back to face you. Hi there, Ayako. Sure, it ain't nice, but this Soviet tank still has a vulnerability in its commander's cupola. Not too hard to set your aim for it while it reloads. Hitting this area nets a high chance for your enemy to see the hangar screen. Hazdem writes, is there a setting to stop a bomber from autocorrecting its flying path when switching to bombing view? Hi, Hazdem? Yes, there is. Go to Options, Main Parameters, Air Battle Settings, find Autopilot for Gunner and Bomb Sight modes, and set it to No. And the last comment for today was written by D's guy. When are you guys going to add custom loadouts for older aircraft? Hi there. There's a reason why we started with the top-rank aircraft. We believe that it was these planes who needed the update system first, with their huge arsenals, tons of hardpoints, and high top carrying capacities. We'll be introducing this new loadout menu to earlier vehicles, prioritizing those that need it more than others. That's it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, and the next episode will premiere the following Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT, or noon Eastern Time. Subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss our next videos. Don't forget to charge your fire extinguishers, leave a like, share your thoughts and comments, and see you next week.